let's start with how you grew up, where you grew up, people in your life that influenced you as a youngster, and ultimately what got you into drugs.
I feel like I was born into it. Definitely had a mother who was addicted to methamphetamine for 40 years. And the community in which I lived was kind of a community of poverty. So it's like your neighbor's addicted, your other neighbor's addicted, everyone in the community was addicted. It wasn't, I was the black sheep running off to be the only one being a drug addict. I felt like I was brought into it. Um, Maybe predestined. They say that a lot of geno characteristics are there when your mother and your father are in addiction, and I believe that I definitely carried those. I grew up in San Diego, California. By many means, to many people across the United States, the beautiful, sunny, clean, wonderful city. But there's definitely aspects of that city, the underbelly, so to say, where drugs run rampant. It is a city that's connected to the border.
Yeah.
So lots of drugs come across the border, land in San Diego, very prevalent drug using community. And I want to say that I started probably with drinking and marijuana around sixth grade, and that wasn't abnormal. That wasn't like, oh my God, so young. That was very, very normal in my community. And that gradually ramped up into the harder stuff in probably around high school. You know, um, Methamphetamine, ecstasy, heroin, cocaine, all of the above. In my high school, every weekend was centered around who was gonna have the most under the influence party that weekend, and that
Right.
was the happening spot.
Mhm.
Uh I think me, just like any other drug addict, wouldn't have told you in second grade when the teacher was asking, "What do you wanna be in life?" "Oh, I wanna be a drug addict?"
Yeah.
It's something that happened, and I think also, like with any other drug addict, we think, "That's not gonna happen to me."
Mhm.
I think every drug addict that I've talked to, every alcoholic that I've talked to, uh, always had this idea in their head that, "Yeah, I'm aware that that stuff's out there, but I've got it beat. I have a plan on how
Right.
this isn't gonna happen to me." And then it happened to me.
Right.
You know?
So I know this topic is sensitive. You're digging into willingly digging into skeletons in your closet. And a lot of people I don't know would be so open about it. This is a kind of a private matter to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Why are you willing to come on to share your story and to be an open book? Because it opens you up.
Absolutely. There's a lot of shame, you know?
Mhm.
There's a lot of guilt for some of the things that I've done in my addiction. And I believe that it's that right there that keeps any addict from moving forward because they are so bound by the shame.
Mhm.
So if I can be a voice that says, "Hey, you can get out," I will gladly do that.
Mhm.
You know, um, because the truth is the reason why I stayed in addiction for as long as I did is because I didn't believe that it was possible for me to get clean.
Mhm.
I didn't have hope. I didn't have uh the ability to imagine my life in any other realm but being in addiction.
Mhm.
So when you're in that type of mind state, and I'm not talking for every addict, this is just, what happened to me. When I was in that, it's kind of like, well, you're an addict anyway. It kind of gives your mind the ability to accept that you're about to do some, forgive my language, dirtbag activity.
Right, yeah.
And then you just accept it. If you believe that you're a loser, if you believe that you're less than, then when you come across things in your day that might be considered a less than loser move, you're like, hey, well, that's what I am.
Oh, wow.
So it makes it kind of easier for your brain to accept that, you
Right.
know, um, hey, you know, you're gonna wear dirty clothes and not take a shower. Hey, well, that's what dirtbags do. It's kind of like an excuse that allows yourself to continue just ruining your life, you know? And I think it's just because for me, at least in my story, I didn't have any hope that it could be any different. And that's something I really wanna, express. I had absolutely 0 hope that my life could be anything other than an addicted person's life.
What changed that? I mean, you were born into this rough situation. You were surrounded by this culture of drug use. You believed that you were this certain way. Even your biology probably uh, drew you to drug usage, and so you had a lot of things fighting against you. What opened your eyes? Was it an experience? Was it a person? Was it a combination? Maybe talk a little bit about what triggered that
So,
paradigm shift.
it definitely was a combination of all of those things. If I had to boil it down to exactly what it was that made my brain accept that, hey, life could be different, it would probably be desperation, you know? Desperation, I believe, improves willingness. Let's put it like this. If you're in the desert and you've been wandering the desert for 3 days and there hasn't been any water anywhere, and then, a genie pops up in front of you and says, "Hey, what would you do for this glass of water?"
Mhm.
The desperation for that glass of water means, I would do anything, you know?
Yeah.
Now, if you're at the water park all day and you've been downing water all day and that same genie comes up to you and says, "Hey, what would you do for this glass of water?" The willingness is not there because you're not desperate.
Mhm.
So I believe in every addict's journey, you know, there has to be desperation, you know? And that's what happened in my story. I became desperate, usually petty crimes. Something would happen, I would go to jail, get out. My mom would have a Section 8 apartment where I could sleep on a couch.
Mhm.
That was always hey, it wasn't the best life,
Mhm.
but it was somewhere where I can go. And at this period in my life when I was changing, when I made the decision to get clean, it was a perfect storm of events. My mother had some things happen in her life where she lost that apartment. She was fighting some legal issues.
Mhm.
That's her story to tell. It was pretty dramatic. It was enough to get her the willingness to get clean. So it's actually a blessing.
Mhm.
Um, so there was nowhere to go when I got out. There was, uh, California has some strict, repeat offender laws, you
Mhm.
know? I had to run through about the length of that they were gonna give me on that. The next offense was gonna put me away for quite a long time.
Mhm.
I was tired, you know? Uh,
How old were you during
the
this time?
I wanna say 31.
Okay.
So, from 6th grade to 31, just going real hard.
Mhm.
And I had ran through all of my, uh, resources. You can only borrow $5 from someone so many times before they're, like, tired of giving you $5.
Right.
So, bridge burning, let's just say, I had burnt all of the bridges. I had burnt all the bridges, I was tired. This is gonna be probably not understood by a lot of people, but in the community that I grew up in, when you went to jail, it wasn't, "Oh my gosh, this guy went to jail." It was like, "Badge of honor. This guy's a
Oh,
real
wow.
one,"
Yeah.
He's, he's about that?
Yeah.
So, that started to wear away. I
Mhm.
no longer cared about being about that
Mhm.
or, certified on the street, so to say.
Right.
I was tired of that. My family, was ripped apart. My mother was no longer there. I never met, my father, so I didn't have a father figure, but, I had sisters that weren't talking. I had no money, no transportation. The law was after me. Felt like everything was against me, and, I do believe that, God provides, you know? My brother, who I hadn't talked to in years, uh finds out that I'm in this, halfway house, about to get rid of or excuse me, about to discharge from that, and, not really having anywhere to go, and he offered me a plane ticket to Arkansas.
Okay.
So, I'm just gonna go ahead and say sorry to Arkansas right right now, but if you're a kid from San Diego and you hear Arkansas, you think banjos and, real deep country and no education and
Mhm.
overalls,
Right.
which is not the case.
Yeah.
But the desperation had grown so much in me that I was willing to do that,
Yeah.
willing to do whatever it took, and that's important.
So that desperation, did it slowly build up over time, or did it come on pretty strong?
I would say both. So slowly over time, I was gaining a little bit more desperation. Probably like every time we ran out of drugs and I was beginning to get sick, a
Mhm.
little thought in my mind would be like, yeah, I should quit. And then someone would come some drugs. I'd be like, yeah, next time,
Right.
So, and, as much as to my friends or people in that community as I would try to put on the front of like, yeah, we like what we're doing. Yeah,
Mhm.
we choose to do this. I didn't,
Mhm.
who likes to be poor?
Mhm.
Like, we wear it like a badge of honor, we're poor. Like, I didn't like that. It was
Yeah.
just kinda like what we had,
Mhm.
Who likes to be running around in the streets all times of night? We would say we did, and that
Mhm.
was to give us I don't know, the excuse to
Yeah.
keep going.
So you came to Arkansas with the intent to kinda start over again. How long ago was that?
Um, God, I wanna say that's the end of 2018.
Okay. What did that transition look like once you got here? Um, how did life change for you?
It was the equivalent of landing on Mars.
Okay.
You know, um, San Diego, I believe, is the 5th biggest city in the United States.
Mhm.
And I didn't land in Northwest Arkansas when I came out here. It wasn't like a metropolis area. It was a rural area.
Mhm.
It was a city called Bush outside of Eureka Springs. And, it was slow. It was real slow. That's one of the things I can appreciate about Arkansas is that it's not moving really, really, really fast. I think
Mhm.
in bigger cities, New York, LA, San Diego, you know, um, you are considered rude if you stop somebody on their path because
Mhm.
they're busy.
Yeah.
In Arkansas, if you don't stop and say hello,
Mhm.
you're considered rude.
Right.
So there's those colloquial things,
Mhm.
cultural things in the South that I had to get used to, but I liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody knew how big of a dirtbag I was.
Right.
New ability to say whatever I wanted to say. You know,
Right.
I didn't say I ran around lying, but, I definitely didn't divulge my whole past to everyone I met.
Like you are right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I learned that in the recovery process that it's important.
Mhm.
And, I think that a lot of the times that a lot of people have respect for that.
Mhm.
And in our head, we're just demonized by it or we think that people are gonna judge us. But when I ask myself, "Hey, would you judge Ty if this was his story?" Say no.
Mhm.
But when it comes to me, all of a sudden, I'm different. And I think it's really, once again, hitting the nail on the head when it comes to addicts. We all believe that we're unique.
Mhm.
My story is so unique. There's probably 1,536,000 of my stories,
Right, yeah.
I just happen to be the one in front of the microphone right now.
Yeah, exactly. When you got here to Arkansas, how did you get into recovery? Because I know recovery, it's not just stopping drugs. That's not recovery.
No, absolutely
Recovery is
not.
a big process. So when did your recovery actually start?
Well, I would say that it started during the last time I was incarcerated. I had made a decision that I wasn't gonna use anymore, which is nothing different from any other time I was incarcerated. Because
Mm,
when people are incarcerated, they talk about all the good things they're gonna do when they get out. They're gonna
mm,
change, which is just like my story. Mine's not anything special,
mhm,
but this time it's stuck. And it's probably because of desperation of I didn't really have anything to go back to.
mhm,
So I had made that decision. I wanted to believe that that was a forever decision and I was gonna stand on it, but in the back of my head, it's like, you'll probably go back to the life you've always been, you
mhm,
know? And, there was a really important moment in my life that really sealed, "Hey, this is the journey you need to be on. this is the path you need to be on, is, I was with my brother. We were at a, uh, guns and ammunition store. He was picking up some things, and the local chief of the fire department walked in, you know, um, and in Eureka Springs or in the surrounding areas, at least, if you are a member of that community, it's like, everybody, "Hey, Bob," or,
Yeah.
he walks in, talks to my brother, notices the new face, introduces himself to me. And I said, "Hey, fireman, that's cool. Something I always wanted to do as a kid. That's awesome." He said, "Come join the fire department." And, me? Like, you want me to join the fire
Right.
department? Uh, and I did. Somebody viewed me as a person who was worth giving this life experience to,
Mhm.
and I ran with it. I became Firefighter Tom.
Wow.
Yeah. So, when I became Firefighter Tom, it's funny to hear me say it like that.
Is
I
that what you call yourself, or is that what other people call you?
uh, nobody calls me that.
Oh, okay. Well, they do now,
Yeah,
Firefighter Tom.
Firefighter Tom here. Uh, Something happened. I wore the firefighter shirt. I had the radio, and I'd walk into stores, and people would be like, "No, no, this is on the house."
Mm,
Um, I'd walk down the street, and people would be like, "Hey, Tom."
mm,
I had never had that in my entire life. If anything, an old lady was walking down the street and saw someone of my type and grabbed her purse tighter.
mhm,
You know, um, I started to believe that I actually could change. It was always a thought or a hope or a prayer. Hey, one day you can change, but I never really truly believed it in the deepest part of my stomach. But in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, people were waving at me. People were inviting me to um, into their community. They were giving me free ice cream. They were telling me I didn't need to pay at certain restaurants. They were, "Thank you for your service, Tommy." And, it was a beautiful thing.
yeah, I mean, what did that feel like? Because your whole life you had believed this narrative about yourself. That narrative was supported by your community. Now you're in a new community. There's a new narrative and people are supporting that new narrative. What kind of feelings did you have?
Um, well, remember I'm an addict, right? So I
Mhm.
wanted more, you know? I wanted more. I started going farther than just the regular firefighter program and became an EMT, you
Mhm.
know? I did all the extras. I wanted all of the extra certifications, low angle rescues for car accidents and stuff like that. And just like a good addict, went all the way with it.
Mhm.
Um, and then the feeling was dreamlike.
Mhm.
Is this really what life is now?
Mhm.
Is this really what you know Tom is today? And yeah, just like any other addict, I wanted more and more and more.
Mhm.
You know, um, so I'm in. I wouldn't say I'm in recovery at this point. I would definitely say I'm not using at all. Nothing. Not
And
alcohol.
that's a big distinction, right?
Huge.
Okay.
I was not using drugs,
Mhm.
but I wasn't restoring all that mess inside of me to recover from.
Mhm.
I wasn't, uh, doing a real deep analysis on all the damage that I had done while I was using. I just wasn't using anymore.
Mhm.
I also had, character defects inside of me that were rearing their head, old habits that were rearing their head that were unhealthy. And all of those character defects were designed to get me back to the using.
Mhm.
Eventually I'll get into enough fights through my character defects where I'll lose that stable house or I'll lose that job or I'll lose those friends that I need to support me. And then I'll have nothing left but to turn back to the drug that is so familiar.
Mhm.
You know, it wasn't until I moved from that rural area up into Northwest Arkansas when we, started to build a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center
Mhm.
that I really started diving into, cleaning up some of that mess,
Mhm.
you know?
So talk a little bit about that transition from Firefighter Tom to recovery center director Tom.
Yeah,
That's in recovery.
it was a slow process. When we began to, launch this recovery center, it was a lot of learning. It was my brother and his partner. They had worked in the recovery field for a couple years. They had definitely more knowledge than I did, but inventing policies and stuff like that was a daunting task. And just when we set a policy in place, another thing comes along that realizes we have to change that policy because
Mhm.
of X, Y, or Z. And that was a couple years of trying to get a footing on it. It's definitely in a good place now, but in those beginning years, it stole 95% of my focus.
Mhm.
It was really important. And then I also had, people underneath me looking up to me, big spotlight on me.
Mhm.
So I knew that I had to be acting in the right way. And I figured if I were to give advice to these addicts, 12-step meetings saved my life. You
Mhm.
know, 12-step meetings, especially, Narcotics Anonymous. I don't know if we're allowed to say that here or not, but
I don't know, you tell me.
I just did. Yeah, I just said it.
I'm
Uh,
good with it.
yeah, and, Narcotics Anonymous is what taught me how to be an adult.
Mhm.
At this time, I'm like, what, 34 years old? It's a pretty humbling experience to say, "Hey, 34-year-old man, this is how you be an adult."
Mhm.
And, just like any addict, I wanted more, you know?
Right.
Along with being an adult and making the right decisions, my life started to transform from not just a person that wasn't on drugs and respected into the community, but was able to provide a life for my family,
Mhm.
was beginning to learn financial responsibility. That's a big one. Uh, if you go into the drug using community and ask them about a FICO score,
Mhm.
that is the last priority on in their life. So I didn't know
Right.
these things. I didn't know about credit. I didn't know about what banks needed to loan you things or how and there were some individuals in Narcotics Anonymous that had been around for a while that taught me. These are the things you do to build credit. These are the things you do to look good on paper. And I think about in those first couple of years, that's where I started to see myself as a person of value.
Mhm.
Firefighter Tom had some value, you know?
Right.
Uh, but that was a piece of what I needed to fill that hole in myself.
Right.
When I got up to Northwest Arkansas and started to be responsible, because like Firefighter Tom still spent all of his money every time he got paid. You
Yeah.
know, Firefighter Tom wasn't very, very responsible.
Right.
Uh, I carried myself appropriately,
Mm.
but I didn't know how to build my life. People started to respect me in that community, but I didn't know how to build my life. I didn't know how to manage money. I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to set a schedule for myself that would keep me in line to be productive through the week. And I think that the amount of humility in that process was huge. And they say that that's a very important part of the process.
So you're saying a lot of these skills came from Narcotics Anonymous, correct?
I would say that the skills came from people that I met in Narcotics Anonymous that were working the Narcotics Anonymous program.
Mhm.
You know, in that Narcotics Anonymous book, it doesn't say on page 13, add salt to boiling water or
Yeah.
I didn't learn how to cook
Right.
through that program, but it allowed a place for me to talk to like-minded individuals that had a little bit more experience than I did that could show me. I think that another characteristic trait that a lot of addicts have is we know everything. You know, and you can't tell us nothing.
Right.
And I sat down, I kinda shut up a little bit, and I allowed myself to learn, you know? And, it's embarrassing. You know what? It's not embarrassing at all today. But in the time when I was
Right.
learning, it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. It Now I know that, hey, when you don't know something, it's because you don't know it, and that's okay.
Mm.
But to be a 32-year-old, person who doesn't know how to write a check or something. I was embarrassed with that. So instead of sharing that with people, "Hey, I'm embarrassed that I don't know how to write a check," I acted like I knew how to write a check
Mhm.
and didn't tell anybody, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that has really changed in my life today is, like, ask for help, you know?
Yeah.
Everyone needs help.
So the recovery community in Northwest Arkansas, tell me a little bit about that. What little I know about it is um, there are people that are very dedicated to it, and it's it's a helpful and prominent program. But because it's anonymous, it's not. It's a little bit undiscoverable. But it's a powerful program. Maybe tell me a little bit about the NA community here in Northwest Arkansas.
I think the NA community in Northwest Arkansas is probably a lot like all the other NA communities around. The people around I've grown really close to, I would definitely say they're solid. The thing about this program that we're talking about is it kind of only works if you go 100% into it.
Mhm,
And a lot of people are turned off by it because they gave 30% effort at one time and it didn't work out, you
mhm,
know? But all that tells me is that, if we want to go back to me in my using days and the time that I was under the influence, there is nothing that I wouldn't do to get loaded.
mhm,
Um, there has never been a time in my life where in my addiction, sorry, where I called up my, connect and said, "Hey man, do you have anything?" And he says, "Yeah, but I'm 2 miles away." I've never been like, "Well, I guess I can't get any." You know, 2 miles away, that's not gonna happen, but we'll see people do that in recovery. "Oh, there's a meeting? Yeah, but it's 2 miles away."
mm,
So, there's people that are willing to go 100% for their addiction, but only give 30% effort to recovery. It's it's easy math. You're probably not gonna make it. If you're willing to go further for your addiction than you are for your recovery, you're probably not gonna make it.
So, would you say that the desperation has not built up enough?
You know, I'm glad you asked that because I think that a lot of people wanna help addicts. I think it's pretty well known across the United States that there are a population of people that have this disease of addiction and they wanna help. Sometimes help hurts, you know? If you need to go do the research to be miserable enough to find us, don't let me get in your way, you know? I will gladly have the door open if you make it back. And that's, like, kinda what addiction has become today because fentanyl and everything's so prominent. I hope you make it back. A lot of people die, you know? But I think that I had to be willing to do whatever it took to get my life together before I would ever get my life together.
Mhm,
So I'm real hesitant on the type of help that I offer a struggling addict.
mhm,
If I'm gonna give you just enough comfort so that you can go get the drugs that you need and be comfortable enough to use,
mm,
then I'm not really helping,
mm,
So I really gotta be selective on the way that I help. Now, once you arrive here and you've made the decision to get clean, I'm all hands on deck,
mhm,
But that inner that reaching the addict who's still in current addiction is kind of like a hands-off thing for me because I don't
mm,
wanna get in the way of the desperation that you need
mm.
to find me.
So, the first time I ever met you, we had a conversation, about tough love, and that conversation has always kinda stuck with me. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about tough love.
Absolutely, which is, segueing into what I was just speaking about is pretty much I love you so much, I'm not gonna help you kill yourself, you know? And that means, no, you can't sleep on my couch. No, you can't borrow my car. No, you can't have some money because you're gonna take that and you're gonna go hurt yourself. And since I love you so much, I'm not gonna give anything to you that's gonna hurt yourself. And, it's really important that unless you're willing to take the leap, maybe, bring yourself to treatment, maybe whatever, I've got nothing for you, And, so many people look at that as cold,
Mhm,
Probably the most loving thing you could do, you know?
mhm,
The disease of addiction is so complex. I believe that you have to be one to really, really know one. We can, have these podcasts and bring some, shed some light on this to the normal person who isn't in addiction. But, uh, so the amount of a craving that a normal person can have, let's say food or water,
Mhm.
you know, I don't know what another normal person would crave. Uh, for the sake of this conversation, food or water
Mhm.
pales in comparison to the amount of craving that an addict gets for their use.
Mhm.
Let's call, if we're on a scale, let's call a normal person without water for 5 days, their extreme peak of what a craving for water would be. It's like a 10. A drug addict would have a craving for his drug for about 1,000, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
So all-consuming,
Yeah.
physical,
Everything.
mental, psychological.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It puts itself up there with the primal instincts of the brain, like gather food, water, procreation, shelter.
Mhm.
It wiggles its way up into the hierarchy of what we need. We need it to survive. That's what our brain's telling us. When we're out there in our addiction is telling us, if you don't get this drug, you're going to die. Now, imagine what someone will do if they believe they're going to die.
Mhm.
That's why you start to see these people, how could you pawn grandma's necklace? How could you?
Mhm.
If you were going to die, you might, right?
Yeah.
And our brain told us we might die if we don't get that. So I don't think, also, since we're addressing this and I want to talk about stigma a little bit, recovered drug addicts are probably some of the most awesome people on the planet. We did horrible things, but that doesn't define us. It's kind of like uh, people today would not say, "Hey, Tommy the liar." They probably wouldn't. I mean, some people might,
Mhm.
but for the most part, people wouldn't say, "Hey, Tommy the liar." In my addiction, I lied every day, all the time. What I think I want to get the message out to people is just because you've done things doesn't mean you can't be something different, or it doesn't have to define you.
Mhm. Tell me more, about the stigma, because I know as a society, um, you know, drug use it's not always looked at as a disease, it's looked at as a choice, which I mean, there is a choice aspect to it, but a lot of times, people are just put into bad situations, such as yourself, um, and so society has an opinion about people that are recovering from drugs. Um, Wondering if you could talk more about um, that that opinion that society has, and maybe what society can do better for those in recovery.
Um, I absolutely 100% believe that it's a disease of addiction. And let's talk about choice. Sure. And that's a great argument, right? Let's say that you're hanging on to a pole, right? Maybe a pull up bar or whatever,
Mhm.
and there's alligators underneath you, right?
Mhm.
You have a choice to let go.
Yeah.
When we talk about it like that and we act as if it's so simple,
Mhm.
when you're hanging there for 2 hours and at some point in time, you just let go, right?
Mhm.
You made the choice.
Yeah.
You know? That's the way that I like to look at it.
Yeah.
They don't understand the pain involved in that, hanging from a pole and how tired you get, right?
Mhm.
How, uh, how exhausted you are, and then you let go.
Mhm.
It's it's so unfair, for it to be looked at like, "Hey, it's a choice."
Mhm.
If you're gonna starve to death, right, not eat, you have a choice, but the pain involved in that. I really don't like that choice argument
Mhm.
because, I think almost anyone that was feeling the way that I felt while I was in my addiction would make the same choice,
Mhm.
you know? It's not they're removing themselves from how it feels in the moment and being all up there on a pedestal saying, "You have a choice."
Mhm.
I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
It was continue in misery or do something that was gonna give you a little bit of ease.
Mhm.
It's not a choice. It's easy
Yeah.
it's easy.
What about people that weren't necessarily born into, um, poor, circumstances? Maybe someone that was, um, born into favorable circumstances, but um, decided to start using. Does your opinion of choice change any?
No, it's still the same, and it just we just push the needle further and farther and further and further until, active addiction has a grip on a person. So a lot of people like, for instance, when I was in 6th grade and we paid a homeless man to get us some beer, right?
Mhm,
I didn't drink that beer and become addicted immediately, you know? That's the tricky thing about this disease is there was actually some goofy fun times with that we had fun, and
mm,
no one was addicted when I first started using. I mean, the older generation, the people that we knew better because we knew everything, right?
mhm,
"You're gonna get addicted. Ah, you don't know what you're talking about." But none of my friends were strung out, you know? So we did it last time. It was fine. Let's do it again.
mhm,
Somewhere in that, actually pretty long down the way, I think I did heroin for a good year, maybe year and a half before I ever felt sick when I didn't have heroin. And then after that year and a half, I got sick every 8 hours if I didn't have heroin. So, like, a lot of times we had fun. So, there isn't a light that goes off that says, "Hey, this time will be fun, but next time you'll be addicted," you know?
mhm,
And we all think we know better, you know? We'll
yeah,
never get it. We'll always we'll stop right before then, you know?
mm.
And then we just fall into it, you know?
So, what would you say to your 6th grade self who paid the homeless man to buy you beer? What would you say to him?
Oh, he wouldn't listen, but,
So it doesn't matter?
doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I could have and I learned this when I was, teaching groups at this drug rehab alcohol center was, you could have the best information in the world. It's worth nothing if they don't want to listen, you know? I could literally tell you the exact way that it would help and save your life. I could tell you exactly what steps for you to guarantee you out of the mess. But I think just like all addicts, we just know more than everyone else, you know? And we are not the same as you, and we're smarter, and we'll do it our way. Our way has never worked out ever, but we're gonna do it different. If if there was a if there was a reflection on all of my great ideas, they never worked out,
Mhm,
right? But I'm gonna do it different.
mhm,
But if I went back to review my past actions, I did it that way already and it didn't work out.
mhm,
So until I was willing to say, "Hey, I don't know how to do this,"
mhm.
I don't think there was a way to help me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and until I was willing to admit that I don't know what I'm doing, please help. I couldn't be helped.
So let's say you had a gaggle of children. Let's say you had 8 kids. You're raising 8 kids. What would you teach them about drugs and alcohol?
Um, everything that I was taught, drugs are bad. You know? Uh, but I think there's something about the addict that thinks that they know better. I wanna say that's a shared trait with every addict. We're smarter and we know better, and it's not gonna happen to us. I don't know. Inform them about their genes. If I had 8 kids, they'd definitely see me going to meetings, and they'd know that's what I gotta do for the rest of my life. Um, and if that's the life that they want, I don't know. I think that that's a great question, you know? You coulda told me the best information ever, I wasn't gonna listen.
Right. Something that surprises me is how dedicated people are to NA meetings. I know people that will attend 4 or 5 NA meetings a week, and after being clean for 20 years.
Yeah. I'm coming up on 8, so I don't really have a lot of information on that 20-year mark, but,
Yeah.
I go to 3 no matter what,
Mhm.
no matter what. And a lot of people look at it as a daunting task, but, in this life that I live now, I don't hang out with anyone who isn't like me.
Mhm.
An addict that once was miserable, hopeless, and has now found a new way to live.
Mhm.
I don't hang out with anybody. Hang out. And we have associates and stuff, we know people, but as
Yeah.
far as hanging out, So 3 times a week, I get to go hang out with all my best friends.
Mhm.
It's not so bad.
Right.
It's cool, and while you're doing it, you get to help someone who might be struggling that shows up, and that feels really good.
Mhm.
To help somebody get their life together, I don't know that there's a better feeling. When you see the lights come on in a hopeless addict and start regaining hope, it's the best.
Yeah.
So, we got hang out with your friends, have good feelings,
Mhm.
get to know that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing,
Mhm.
and it's an hour long. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. So you recently left your role, as a director of the drug rehab facility. Tell me what led to that, and how do you continue to give to the recovery community?
Yeah, just like any other thing in life, there's a balance. I need to be helping people. I need to be doing it gives helping you is a selfish thing. I'm helping you because it makes me feel better. I'm just being honest, right?
Yeah.
I feel good about myself when I
Right.
help people.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win. When you're on call, 24 hours a day and you start to get resentful for doing that, you probably should take a step back, and that's what I decided. There was some other things going on. I have nothing bad to say about that company. I helped build it,
Mhm.
but it was very demanding. And, there was a lot on my plate, and it was hard to breathe at times, and I really wanted to relax, so I had to step away because of those reasons.
Mhm.
When you're s when you are when your plate is so full and you realize you're snapping at someone who really, really needs help, you should
Mhm.
probably take a look at yourself. And at the beginning of my journey, I had all the patience in the world.
Right.
So much patience. After day 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 after day, and the same problems keep coming that you've heard 100 times and
Mhm.
100 times. I wish I was, more patient, but I think I'm just human,
Mhm.
and it gets really, really hard to do that every day, you know? I've got a lot of respect for those people who've been in that field for 20 years.
Mhm.
Or maybe it was my position, being at the top. I had a lot of people underneath me and stuff, and it was very stressful. There were some things going on at home that really needed me there to be there. And I hadn't been at home for a while because I was so lost in helping these other people. So it was stepping back for my own self.
Yeah. So just the demands were pretty incredible,
Never ending.
never ending.
Yeah.
So what's the future look like for you as far as, the community and serving and helping others?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, right? So I don't know. I can tell you what I'd like to do.
Yeah.
I would like to find a way to make addicts that have made the decision to go into treatment feel more comfortable. You know, I would like to really reinforce, hey, that was a good decision. You know, a lot of times when people are deciding that they want to go ahead and check themselves into rehab or whatever, they don't have the presence of mind to remember everything that they need for this couple week stay.
Mhm.
A lot of times they don't have toothbrushes or
Mhm.
socks or stuff like that. And I don't know if I want to give those things to people that are out there in the street using because they just got comfortable enough to go use their next one. But if you've made the decision that you want to try, I definitely want to help.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of people are going to look at that weird or think that I'm cold or whatever. I don't want to help. I don't want to work harder for you on your recovery than you're willing to work. But if you've made the decision that you want this for your life, I want to 100% be behind you. And sometimes, we still have these character defects when we get into rehab and stuff, when we have pride and we have, ego and stuff like that. And I don't know that I would ask for help. Hey, I need socks. I need a toothbrush. I'm a man. I provide for myself, you
Yeah.
know? I don't know if I had to even have the ability to do that. So I'd like to do things where, I can bring those things to people who have made the decision to change their life. I think that's really, really important for me. Bless all those people who wanna go and help everybody. That's their journey. For me, I wanna help the people who have made the decision to help themselves.
Yeah.
And if they don't know how, that's okay. I just need that willingness.
Right.
If you're willing to try, I've got your back.
Yeah.
If you don't wanna try, I got nothing for you.
What advice would you have for, one, members of the community that have never used drugs who know somebody that is in addiction? What would you tell them?
I would, depending on the level of severity of addiction, there are some things that people use today that if they stop, they'd die, right? So there are alcoholics and people that use benzos and stuff that they decided, and they're so addicted to them that if they decided they were going to stop, they could possibly seize out and die,
Mhm.
um, very, very easily, right? So we don't want everyone just to quit cold turkey that are addicted to those things, right? You should definitely go under the supervision of a doctor and make sure that you're not going to have a seizure or, stroke out. I would probably push treatment. Treatment's cool. I don't think treatment is a solution for life, but it's a good first step.
Mhm.
You know, um, Treatment just introduces you into a program that could save your life. I work a program that can save my life,
Mhm.
but treatment is just the step that got me there.
Yeah.
As far as those people that are using, I would say you get nothing from me at all. Nothing unless you make a decision to change your life. And what is an addict going to say? I made a decision to change my life.
Mhm.
Give me something now.
Yeah.
Right. So go do something where I can see that you've really done it. You know,
Yeah.
once you enter into treatment, I'm a little bit more lenient on that help.
Yeah.
But if I give you $20 and you go buy drugs and those drugs that you bought with my $20 kill you, what help did I really give you?
Right. Yeah.
So no money,
No.
no money, no things that can be sold for money, you know?
So one of the concepts of Narcotics Anonymous and recovery is acknowledging a higher being.
Absolutely.
Whether that, and I know that's not, they leave that definition open to the person. Who is that higher being to you, and what role does that play in who you are in your recovery?
I don't have a problem sharing with people my own. It's probably nothing that I would do while I was in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, but since you asked and we're on a podcast,
Yeah.
I'm a Christian,
Okay.
right? And I believe that without my higher power's guidance, I won't make it. So it has played a huge role, you know? The thing is giving my life over to it was the big deal,
Mhm.
right? It's kinda like, believing wasn't so much of a problem for me. Now this is my story. There's a lot of people who struggle with that higher power
Mhm.
concept or whatever. I didn't have that struggle. I always believed that there was something that was greater than myself that could get me through these things. Now, the real struggle for me was giving my way over to their way of life,
Mhm.
right? It's kinda like you didn't have to convince me that going to the gym would get you in shape, right? I believe that.
Mhm.
Now, going to the gym every day to get in shape is a different story,
Right.
right? So, like, I believe that there was a higher power. It's absolutely important, but to live by my higher power's rules was kind of the struggle. You know, um, uh, I had to make a decision that this is the way that I was going to walk, and it's non-negotiable. This is the way that I'm going to. We have some non-negotiable things that we work in our life. Honesty, you know, open-mindedness, willingness. 3 of these spiritual principles that you don't bend or break.
Mhm.
That's the stepping stone into this. Um, and then we have to explore, honesty is funny. Uh, Honesty is not just telling something that is truth or a lie,
Mhm.
right? One of the biggest dishonest things I've ever done in my life has been, "You got this, Tommy." You know, when I really needed help or
Yeah.
I didn't have it. I was dishonest.
Mm.
And then to walk about life as if, I was being honest with myself. Honesty has levels, you know?
Mhm.
Um, I had someone point this out to me a long time ago. It really, really opened my eyes. Uh, I used to tell people I was on drugs when I was on drugs. I didn't really hide it. I didn't care. I did not care if you knew I was on drugs.
Mhm.
I didn't care at all. I would tell people I was gonna go use drugs. You can tell me whatever you want. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's what I'm gonna go do. If you asked me, did I steal that? For the most part, yeah, I stole that. I thought I was honest, you know? And then, someone told me, "So when you got pulled over by the cops and they asked if there's any drugs in the car, you were like, 'Yeah, in the glove box, right?'" Like, "No." You know?
Right.
So what I started to find was that I was honest when it benefited me,
Mm.
and then I was dishonest and I had a reason or we call it a justification. I was able to justify why I was dishonest. Well, I didn't wanna go to jail,
Mhm.
right? Being honest non-negotiably has been a really cool way to live,
Mhm.
you know? And then open-mindedness. This is there is a Webster's dictionary that's probably gonna tell you something different. My definition of mindedness is it possible, so it's like a question, right?
Mhm.
Is it possible that what you think you need and what you actually need are 2 different things? And that's like the definition of open-mindedness
Mhm.
for me, because I think I need this, but I really, really needed something worse to happen. Like, if you would have told me in the middle of my addiction, "Hey, you're gonna go to prison, it's gonna be the best thing for you." Right?
You'd be like, "No, thanks."
Yeah. Uh, it turns out that's what I needed.
Yeah.
I needed to sit down for a while, and I needed to reflect and become desperate. I needed to have some pain. That pain pushed me towards a desperation that changed my life. Without that pain, I don't know if I'd ever made the decision to get clean.
Yeah. Well, let's close with this final question. Um, is there a person that you wanna become like? A specific person? If not, if there's not a specific person, um, what are the traits if that person existed that you wanna become like, what is that person's traits?
Yeah, I think I'd rather take the route of the traits. Um, I would really like to be a person who didn't change his morals due to the person he was dealing with. That's something I'm really working on today. So, like, it's much easier for me to be nice to my friend than it is for me to be nice to someone who I don't like.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to be even across the board where my
Mhm,
principles just shine through.
mhm,
Um, I would like to be a person who can reel back his emotions. It's what I'm working on today.
mhm.
I would like to be a person who is honest and trustworthy. I'd like to be a person with a Lamborghini. No. um, and someone that I can be okay with when I lay my head on the pillow. And actually, even better than that, to be excited about who I was that day.
Right.
So that's my journey.
Cool. Alright, Tommy, well, um, I mean, I'm inspired by you and what you've overcome and your story, and I hope it helps other people. I hope it opens other people's eyes. I hope there's people out there that might be struggling that this gives a little bit of hope to. And I respect the fact that you are so open about this and and honest and vulnerable. Um, because that's important.
Yeah, I think so.
It's important to have that vulnerability and so I appreciate that and you are an inspiration to me and again appreciate you coming on and telling your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Right on.